Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with This Week in Cannabis News from March 28th to April 3rd. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And then, of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos, but then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with, as I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you're ready. But we're going to start with this news from Leafly, as early results are in and New Mexico's adult use market is off to a very hot start, as New Mexico's new adult use cannabis stores sold more than 650,000 in cannabis products through 12 noon on Friday, despite a glitch in point-of-sale software that delayed many dispensaries from making their first sales until almost 10 a.m. And from my understanding, they did open up at 12 midnight Friday morning, so people had lined up early to get a head start. And so happy to report that from Leafly. Let's go New Mexico, as we got some live footage of one of the midnight openings of the first recreational cannabis sales in New Mexico at our Greenleaf in Las Cruces. So thank you, Texas Cannabis Collective, for sharing this and for making the journey from Texas into New Mexico to get some footage of this. And so this is a lineup outside of one of the first stores opening. So you can tell the demand is there and people want their legal cannabis. Woo! That is massive. Look at that line. One more time, just for dramatic effect. So thank you again, Texas Cannabis Collective, for sharing this. Like, yo. The people are buzzing in New Mexico. And so on to this. Just to confirm what we saw on Friday, as we were all expecting. So thank you, Tom Engel, for sharing this, as the news broke around 12:34 p.m. on Friday that the U.S. House of Representatives just voted to federally legalize cannabis by passing the MORE Act out of the House. The bill now heads to the Senate, where Majority Leader Chuck Schumer will soon file his own cannabis bill, the CAOA, or the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act. Now, it's worth understanding that in the Senate, the MORE Act and the CAOA, both these bills will not pass out of the Senate because no Republicans will agree to a lot of the overreaching federal overhang and the free giveaways and the high taxes that they do entail. So look out for Schumer to file his CAOA bill around 420, as he signaled in the past that he will. But keep in mind, while we all want federal legalization sooner than later to right the past wrongs, free nonviolent offenders, and free this plant, the reality is for these bills to pass in the Senate, they need a number of Republican votes, and they simply do not have that. And so that is why we're anticipating some sort of come-between bipartisan effort that will include the Safe Banking Act, which the Republicans like, plus some more progressive ingredients, which include, providing clemency and releasing offenders that will look good for the Democrats as well. Well, we got a few other developments over the weekend, so I wanted to share this one from Tom Engel, as the House wants to keep the momentum going. Apparently, days after approving legalization, the House is set to vote Monday on a bill to remove barriers to conducting cannabis research, something we certainly want to normalize and allow more of, including by allowing access to dispensary products. And so the Senate passed separate cannabis science legislation last month, but this came as of April 2nd, so happy to share that the House does not want to slow that momentum either. Well, this was nothing really definitive, but just worth sharing, as apparently the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, in her last few days as the White House Press Secretary as well, because she's obviously jumping ship, which is probably the wise thing for her to do, said President Joe Biden agrees with most Democratic lawmakers that our current cannabis laws are not working. Really then, why don't you keep your promise and do something about it? But declined to specify if he supports a legalization bill the House passed hours earlier. Just makes no sense. And again, this administration seems to be slowly falling apart at the seams, and all we can really do is observe and watch and hope that it doesn't dismantle itself too quickly from now until November. But on to this one from Marijuana Moment, as federal cannabis legalization bill would add billions in revenue and reduce prison costs, a Congressional Budget Office says. And I've been saying this for the last year and a half, but if you learn this, why would you not want to get this bill passed sooner than later and end prohibition? So a bill set to go before the U.S. House of Representatives this week to federally legalize and tax cannabis would add billions in revenues and reduce prison costs over the next decade, according to a report released by the Congressional Budget Office on Wednesday. As overall, the office said that it expects the proposed federal taxes included in the MORE Act, and while we know this bill won't even pass, regardless, this research highlights the clear benefits of ending cannabis prohibition would bring in $8.1 billion in revenue from 2022 to 2031. And the Congressional Budget Office also looked at the impacts of legalization on the prison system, as H.R. 3617 would federally decriminalize cannabis expunge the records of people convicted of federal cannabis offenses, and require resentencing of some federal prisoners, the report says. As a result, CBO estimates thousands of current inmates would be released earlier than under current law. In the future, decriminalization also would reduce the number of people in federal prisons and the amount of time they serve. And it is estimated that the policy change would mean that time served in federal prison would be collectively reduced by 37,000 person years for current and future inmates, while CBO predicted that the Bureau of Prisons would save about $800 million because there would be fewer people in prison amid sentence reductions. And so it seems like this is where they pulled the data from the Congressional Budget Office. But just a few more points. By restoring the rights of people who have been criminalized over cannabis, the office said that there would be increased direct spending on federal benefits, amounting to $344 million over the next decade as formerly incarcerated people become eligible for various programs. While revenue from cannabis taxes, meanwhile, would be partially offset by allowing cannabis businesses to make tax deductions and claim credits that they're currently prohibited from doing under the predatory tax code known as 280E. And so there's a lot more that you can pause to read, although a lot of these would entail things of the MORE Act that likely will not get passed. But regardless, here's a list of the reasons why we ought to end prohibition, and the only thing standing in the way seem to be the lawmakers that refuse to work for the will of the American people. And so this is why I ask Americans, please, time to start making some noise so that we can finally free this plant and right the past wrongs as we should. And so I wanted to share this one from Squawk on the Street, as Curaleaf Executive Chairman Boris Jordan says he'd love to see full cannabis legalization pass all at once, but realistically knows it will be more piecemeal. First banking, then social equity, followed by taxes, and ending with interstate commerce. But I would just think that the louder the American people become and the more noise that they make, the sooner we can just make these incremental steps happen, I would say. So Carl Quintilla of, CNBC anyways, interviews Boris, so let's watch this.
Would you be happy to settle for the SAFE Act for banking parameters at the expense of a full-blown MORE Act, let's say?
Listen, everybody knows my personal position, and it goes against most of the industry. I want to get the whole kit and caboodle done, but I have to be a realist, and I think this is going to have to be done in steps. First, I think it's going to be banking and some social equity issues that need to be resolved, like expungement, whole back of AOC. I'm very supportive of that. I think the next step will be taxes, the 280E tax burden, which is also affecting the industry tremendously. And then I think we can get to rescheduling and potentially interstate commerce. But I don't think the Senate is ready to do the whole thing right away. And so I do think there's going to be compromise. And something like a SAFE Plus is probably the first step, which will address the issues in the minority communities, expungement of criminal cases, as well as banking. I think those are the two things we should try to get past this year, and then look to further legislation in future years.
So Boris, what would that actually mean if this is how this plays out? What does it mean for Curaleaf and the business that you have here in the U.S.?
I think for all of us, not only Curaleaf, for all of us, it means that our cost of capital would drop, the safety of our employees in our stores would be
especially
much
small
higher.
businesses.
We're very concerned.
And minority entrepreneurs.
Armed guards, that never helps either, as you know. That creates potential conflicts. But we have armed guards in all of our stores. We have to hire armored cars to drive our products and our cash to and from the banks every single day. Everybody knows the roots of those things. It's become a real problem. We're having in California, our trucks delivering products are being abducted regularly by criminals who are trying to steal the cannabis out of these or the cash out of these trucks. And so we're having a problem in keeping our employees safe. Now, thank God, in Curaleaf's case, we haven't had a problem with safety yet, but a lot of other companies have. So it'll help the safety of our employees. It'll help minority communities get access to banking services. So they can, not a single social justice program has worked in either Illinois, New York, New Jersey, anywhere, and it hasn't worked for one reason. Minority entrepreneurs cannot open bank accounts, and the cost of capital is too high for them to be able to launch. So everybody talks about helping these communities, but no one's doing anything. We need safe banking, and we need the HOPE Act to expunge these criminal charges that have been laid against the minority communities in the United States. So we need these two things, and I'm hoping we can get them this year.
And while we know passing safe banking would make America much safer sooner than later, getting $25 billion in cash off the streets, and we know SAFE would pass the Senate tomorrow if Schumer would hold a standalone vote because it has more than 60 votes now from Democrats and Republicans because it's good policy, the reality is Americans needed SAFE a year ago. And so the longer the Dems do nothing and just keep idealizing and dreaming about what could be, as opposed to passing what we have and then just continuing to pass more and more, just makes them look really bad. And so on some safe news, just wanted to share this one from Todd Harrison in response to a Yahoo Finance article that features Isaac Boltansky, who is the Director of Policy Research on BTIG. Because I don't know anything about lobbying, and while I harp on it and think it should be illegal because obviously it contaminates politics, he does add that lobbying is cumulative and they were very close last year. Sharing this as there were whispers that the specter of SAFE in the NDAA last November was misinformation, and I'm here to say that it wasn't. It wasn't. It was the best shot that we had. The intel was spot on, but the effort came up short, mainly because Schumer pulled it out, because Schumer's being Schumer. But I just wanted to share what this analyst had to say. I am bullish on cannabis banking getting done this year, said Isaac Boltansky, Director of Policy Research at BTIG, in an interview with Yahoo Finance Live. So you can grab that link if you wanted to watch that interview. But he adds, you have a few vehicles it can be attached to, the defense bill or the China competitiveness bill. We know that lobbying is cumulative and they were very close last year, and so that's possibly a good sign they'll be closer this year. And I think you can wrap cannabis banking along with some of these restorative justice and research bills to make it more palatable to progressives. And I think that's exactly the Dems' plan at this point because they don't have much else that they can do. And so just wanted to share this whole snippet from Isaac Boltansky at BTIG on cannabis. So thank you, Todd, for sharing this on the MORE Act and safe policy. So he just adds, House clears comprehensive cannabis reform bill, but we remain focused on cannabis banking in second half of 2022. Adding, reminder, there is no path to passage for cannabis legalization in this Congress. We remain bullish on cannabis banking in second half of 2022 and what's next. So you can pause to read those snippets. Well, we've also got this one from Shooter McGinley providing a March recap on U.S. cannabis. So thanks, Todd, for sharing this. Just if you're interested, you can pause to read as well, just to recap what he has said about U.S. cannabis stocks. So on to some MSOs. So we've got Trulieve to launch adult use sales at Napa retail location as Harvest of Napa recently named Best Dispensary for the third time. They announced Friday that it will begin adult use sales at its affiliated Harvest Dispensary in Napa, California on April 1. And at first this is a bit surprising, thinking, what? California legalized adult use a long time ago? But apparently Napa's City Council approved a new ordinance on February 1 to allow adult use cannabis retailers and manufacturers. So you learn something new every day. Apparently there could be many cities in California still that have not yet legalized for adult use. And so Harvest of Napa was the first dispensary open to Napa patients in December 2018, while the Napa dispensary now offers more than 90 strains of flower and recently was named Best Dispensary for the third time by Bohemian Magazine, while the location also won Best Edibles and Best Vape Shop categories. So good job, or good news for Trulieve and any MSO that might have a location in Napa or any of these cities where they've recently just been announced to launch adult use programs, because obviously that will allow for more organic growth that we had not anticipated. While we got this one out of Columbia Care as they opened their fourth cannabis dispensary in West Virginia, establishes a wholesale leadership position there as well. As they announced Friday that the newest dispensary in West Virginia located at 225 Don Knotts Boulevard in Morgantown is now open. And Cannabis Morgantown is the fourth Columbia Care dispensary to open in the state in 2 months and the company's 84th nationwide. So good to see Columbia Care continue to expand in some of these less competitive markets early to try and get a head start, while Columbia Care is currently one of the 2 operators in the state manufacturing product and is the only operator selling to third-party dispensaries, with its product now available in 75% of the state's dispensaries. So good to see them trying that wholesale approach. And while there might not be many dispensaries in the state, so 75% doesn't make up a whole lot, if they can get their brands into every single one of them in West Virginia, that'll help them be one of the market share leaders. And so I wanted to share this one from Green Thumb, as Green Thumb is already ready to hold its first quarter 2021 earnings conference call on May 4th, 2022. And while Verano hasn't even held their Q4, and that's coming April 7th, and while we know Verano is busy making acquisitions and they're transitioning from IFRS to GAAP accounting principles, takes time, but regardless, Green Thumb is already ready with their Q1, and so that will be coming after market Wednesday, May 4th at 5 p.m. following the release of its first quarter 2022 financial results. So I do look forward to seeing that, as Green Thumb is already prepared. Well, we got this one from Normal that I wanted to share, as cannabis is becoming more popular, as a poll finds supermajority of voters favor federal repeal of cannabis prohibition. Yeah, so why don't the lawmakers want to listen? As 70% of registered voters support the repeal of federal prohibition, the survey found. Support was strongest 83% among Democrats and those between the ages of 30 to 44, who are not our future, those are the younger generation, but who will be the decision makers in the coming, next decade. So 70% of independents and 58% of Republicans endorse federal reform. So seems like we are reaching the light light at the end of the tunnel, folks. And so on to some state news. This one comes from the Office of Medical Cannabis Use. Looking at this past week in Florida from March 28th to April 1st, we can see that Med Florida, which I know is owned by Verano, opened a new location on Marco Island, while Sanctuary, I don't know the parent company behind them, opened a new location in Tampa. And if we check the qualified patient count, we can see that Florida has surpassed 700,000 patients for the first time ever. So great job, Florida, as they've increased their qualified patient count to 702,081 patients, which represents an increase from last week of 2,747 patients. So good job as Florida continues to add that organic growth. Well, if we look at dispensations from March 25th to the 31st, we can see all the MSOs that operate in Florida, and we can see the number of milligrams of THC sold, milligrams of CBD sold, and ounces of smokable flower sold. And so if you invest in any MSO, you can check week over week whether they've increased their sales, decreased, and whether they're keeping or losing market share. But just got to say, Trulieve's putting in work. That's a hell of a lot of milligrams of THC sold in a single week. So good job, Trulieve. On to some other states, but thank you, Marijuana Moment, for reporting as Missouri lawmakers approve a GOP-led cannabis legalization bill in a committee. So we love to see progress out of Missouri as the legislation from Rep. Ron Hicks, titled the Cannabis Freedom Act, cleared the House Public Safety Committee in a 5-4 vote with amendments, and it now heads to the Rules Committee before it could potentially advance to the floor. And so you can pause to read. However, this bill is far from final, and so a lot of this can change, but regardless, it's nice to see an adult-use cannabis bill, GOP-led, moving through Missouri, which has a population of about 6.1 million people. So that could be a new total addressable market that comes online in the coming years once they see legalization. So great to see that. Well, New Hampshire House approves a state-run cannabis legalization bill and unfortunately rejects a psilocybin decriminalization measure. So good to see progress out of New Hampshire, though, because this is the first state that is approving a state-run cannabis legalization bill. And if a state is going to be selling cannabis, I imagine they're not going to be wanting to pay 280E like much of the other MSOs. And this could be one way that we get 280E removed. Maybe they know Prohibition or the end of Prohibition is coming as well. Who knows? But it passed on the floor last month, but needed to go back to the Ways and Means Committee because it involved economic components. Now, that panel met several times and made amendments, sending it back to the floor, where the full body passed it again in a tight 169 to 156 vote, and it now heads to the Senate. So I will provide an update on that, but again, still speculating, not saying that this will happen, but I just find it interesting that if one state wants to go state run, that's got to get rid of 280 for the rest of them. MSOs, I should say. Well, Tom Engel shares breaking news that the Maryland House and Senate officially voted to put a cannabis legalization referendum on the November ballot and send the governor a separate bill to begin implementation if voters approve the reform. So great job, Maryland, for officially getting that question put on the ballot for November, and I imagine it's going to be an overwhelming yes. And just to add that Maryland also has a population of roughly 6 million people, so when you combine that with Missouri's 6 million and then New Hampshire's about 1.3 million, now we'll round down to say 8 to 10 million, because obviously kids and teenagers will not be part of this purchasing. Regardless, that just goes to show that as states end Prohibition, the total addressable market for the entire country just continues to expand organically, and that's likely going to be what we're going to see over the coming decade. While we got this one from Marijuana Moment, as Pennsylvania senators are not waiting for Safe Banking Act, and they approve a cannabis banking protection bill as congressional reform stalls. And so there's a lot more information as to why they're doing that, but we know why they're doing it. So just some of the details that I wanted to share. The text of the Pennsylvania legislation states that a financial institution authorized to engage in business in this Commonwealth may provide financial services to or for the benefit of a legitimate cannabis-related business and the business associates of a legitimate cannabis-related business. And the same protections would also be codified for insurers. However, it specifies that the bill would not require banks or insurers to provide services to medical cannabis businesses. So let me get this right. You're passing this bill to protect banks from being penalized for working with the newly legitimate cannabis businesses, but you're giving banks and insurers the right to determine what is and what is not a legitimate business in their eyes, and so they can easily just discriminate against cannabis businesses. Doesn't seem very cannabis friendly. Seems very much a banking friendly bill, as walking around with bags of cash is something that we need to move away from, and both the state and federal government need to take the appropriate provisions to prevent that, he said. Obviously, and that's why you deschedule cannabis. It just gets rid of all of these problems. It's an access issue. Allowing banks improves the quality of access that patients will have. What about MSOs and employees in the industry that still can't open bank accounts? And ultimately, again, we in the Commonwealth have an obligation, as does the federal government, to take appropriate steps to allow this. Well, then federal government just deschedule cannabis. But even on top of that, what about payment processors? If you get cash off the street, you think Visa and MasterCard all of a sudden don't have to follow federal laws at this point? So again, while this sounds like a good effort, I see this as really just being pro-banking and not very good for the cannabis industry. So while I don't know exactly how this would play out, let's just hope that we get safe sooner than later so that more states don't try some sneaky stuff, when in reality, we just want to change the rule at the top, and that fixes everything. Well, this one from Todd Harrison highlights that the Pennsylvania Health Department is apparently now being sued over the cannabis vape recall. And I covered this story a few months back, and I believe it was Trulieve and Curaleaf that were targeted mostly by the Pennsylvania Health Department, saying that there were some ingredients in the vape cartridges that shouldn't belong there. But good to see some MSOs fighting back and biting with their teeth, as lawsuit alleges recent recall of medical cannabis vape products in Pennsylvania cost a group of cultivators, manufacturers, and dispensaries tens of millions of dollars. And I would imagine that the only reason that they're suing is because in the end, there was not a whole lot of evidence or proof, or what they claimed was not true. And so hopefully some MSOs can get some of the money back that they lost. But also here for a snippet, Todd, pay attention, New Jersey. Don't make the same mistakes that Pennsylvania is doing. So I wanted to share this one from Ganjapreneur, as Minnesota may license additional medical cannabis producers. So good news out of Minnesota, as a bill introduced in Minnesota would add at least 2 more medical cannabis producers in the state, aiming to increase production, spur more competition, and perhaps drive prices down. 5 Eyewitness News reports. Republican State Senator Mark Corin, the bill sponsor, said that there could be a lot of benefits to adding more medical cannabis producers. I imagine there would be by 2024. Well, if you could do it sooner than later, I imagine there'd be even more benefits. But good news out of Minnesota, and hopefully that can become a reality to increase the supply there. Well, this one from High Times, thought it was very interesting. We're sharing a study finds that hemp can reduce stress in cattle, as researchers at Kansas State University have found that livestock feeding containing industrial hemp can reduce stress levels in cattle, according to a recent release study. How cool. The 2018 Farm Bill legalization of hemp has led to a flurry of research across the country as scientists work to discover novel ways to make use of the valuable agricultural commodity. It's not a new agricultural commodity. It's always been around. We just criminalized it for some stupid reason. The previous research at Kansas State has shown that plant matter from industrial hemp has favorable crude protein and digestibility profiles, potentially making the crop suitable for inclusion in cattle feed. Another study revealed that cattle readily absorbed cannabidolic acid, CBDA, after being fed hemp flowers produced for CBD production. Michael Cleanhens, assistant professor of beef production at the Kansas State University College of Veterinary Medicine, says that the previous research has implications for the viability of industrial hemp as a potential livestock feed. And obviously we should consider looking into this, as our most recent data shows how cannabinoids via industrial hemp decrease the stress hormone cortisol, as well as the inflammatory biomarker prostaglandin E2, Cleanhens said. This shows that hemp containing cannabidolic acid, or CBDA, may decrease stress and inflammation in cattle. Probably does the same in humans too. Thus, hemp may be a natural way to decrease stress and inflammation related to production practices such as transportation and weaning. And the researchers also determined that the group of cattle given feed containing industrial hemp spent more time lying, which can aid digestion by helping the animals produce saliva and chew their cud. The study revealed that while cannabinoids could be detected in the animals that had been fed industrial hemp, the level did not increase over time. And so again, more reason why we got to deschedule this plant. It's not only beneficial for humans, but for animals as well. And that is it for today's episode, folks. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Wednesday for a midweek and I'll catch you. And I'll catch you on Wednesday for a midweek update in the world of cannabis. Have a great week, everybody.